Hi, everybody. I have just finished this volume in The Shadow of Young Girls in Flower by Marcel Proust, and I want to do a little review of it. These are the newer translations released by Penguin Deluxe Classics. Let's take a look at this one, Volume 2 in Search of Lost Time. I'm Jim. This is Great Books, Big Ideas. Welcome to the channel. If you're a newcomer, I hope you like and subscribe and ring the notification bell. If you're an old timer or you're an occasional visitor, you may be aware that I have set it a task for myself to read all of Marcel Proust in Search of Lost Time in these newer Penguin Deluxe Classics translations. Swan's Way was translated by Lydia Davis. I finished that about a month and a half ago. Really enjoyed it. And Volume 2, In the Shadow of Young Girls in Flower, is translated by James Grieve. I'd like to make a few comments about this translation, and maybe we'll do some comparisons between the James Grieve and the original C.K. Scott Moncrieff translation of this book. And we'll give you a little synopsis of what this volume is about. This is my second read-through of Marcel Proust, so the first time took me a lot of years. I don't even admit how many years it took me to get through all of them in the C.K. Scott Moncrieff, but it was a very rewarding experience. Proust has become one of my favorite authors, and I collected these last year. I got a full set of them cobbled together, and I've been chomping at the bit wanting to read them. And with the coming of the new year, I saw that some YouTubers were sort of posing a reading event to read all of Marcel Proust in a year. And I thought, I'm game for that challenge. This will allow me to read all these that I collected. And the second time through has been very, very, very nice so far. So what is In the Shadow of Young Girls in Flower about? Well, in C.K. Scott Moncrieff's translation, this volume is called Within a Budding Grove. The newer Penguin translations are more literally translated. And one nice thing, a couple nice things I like about these volumes are the end notes. So they help you with a lot of the cultural references. And also they provide a synopsis of the volume. So to the extent that there is any plot in Proust, you do get some of that. So in Swan's Way, which was the first volume, we have, after the amazing overture with our narrator, who, is now opened up to exploring his past, the bulk of that volume is about Charles Swann and his mistress Odette, whom he eventually marries. It's about his jealous love for her, and the narrator takes a back seat, and Charles Swann is the protagonist of about half of that volume, if not more. And then we come back to our narrator, who's still a younger lad, and he develops a crush on the daughter of Charles Swann and Odette, his wife. And we sort of pick up where we left off in Volume 2. So we have a lot of descriptions of the narrator hanging out at the Swann's residence. We get some backstory. We get a lot of lovesick crushing on Gilberte, the daughter, and their back and forth relationship. We have the discussion of the author Bergot, whom the narrator really likes his work, and he gets to meet Bergotte. We have a nice set piece in the early part of the novel is about an actress, performer, singer, La Berma is her moniker, and she's performing scenes or songs from the drama Phèdre. And it's an interesting reaction that the narrator has, where he's all ginned up and excited about seeing her, but initially he's a little disillusioned by it, and then his reaction changes based on what other people say about that. But a lot of the early part of the novel is about the Swan household and the narrator's attempts to ingratiate himself to both the parents, Charles and Odette. He seems to be very smitten with Odette, but then he's also got the love interest in Gilberte, the daughter. There is a scene where the narrator's friend Bloch, Bloch, takes him to a brothel, and then some early mention, one of the first mentions in the book of Albertine is made on page 173 of this edition, and she's going to figure quite prominently by the end of the book, and then in subsequent volumes. She becomes a major love interest of the narrator, and at this point, she's just kind of talked about in terms of hearsay. There is a painful New Year's Day that's described when no letter is coming, celebrating that from Gilberte, and we have a kind of a falling out between Gilberte and the narrator. I think he overreacts, but he then sort of resists all invitations from her to come over and hang out. There's a lot of psychodrama going on here, and eventually he stops visiting Madame Swann, and it seems like he's going to move on from this episode in his life. And then we have a jump in time of 2 years to his grandmother, and the narrator, who is quite sickly. They are going to leave for a seaside town Proust names Baalbec on the Normandy coast, and most of the rest of the book takes place at Baalbec. So we have a major setting shift, and a lot of description of him acclimating to the Grand Hotel where they're staying, and just trying to get used to it. A lot of very careful observations about what it feels like to be on vacation, what it feels like to be in a new place at this seaside resort, and a lot of social politicking going on, getting to know the different residents, and there's a lot of class consciousness and so forth. He does meet the Marquis de Saint-Loup and Bray. He becomes a friend, and we have the interjection of some anti-Semitic themes, which is a running thread throughout the book. And Bloch, his other friends, is in fact Jewish, and there's not all these friends get along, but it's interesting sort of friendship dynamics that are described. And then also an artist by the name of Elstier becomes important. And it's through this artist that the narrator gets to know this gang of girls who he's become smitten by. He observes them frolicking on the beach and on the seaside, It's kind of like a boardwalk feel, but I guess it's not really a boardwalk. But anyway, he sees them frequently and he becomes enamored and he wants to get to know them better. And Elstier, who is this artist that the narrator is interested in just for his art, he also knows these girls, so it's sort of a way in to leverage into that. And so much of the book is really taken up with these girls they're quite saucy and interesting, and they're very well drawn, these characters. And one of these girls, of course, it so turns out, is the famous Albertine. And eventually, although there's a lot of back and forth, the narrator chooses her as his major love interest. So she has really replaced Gilbert in his affections. And there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of miscommunication, a lot of trying to interpret this character who is quite inscrutable. And the narrator himself is pretty unpredictable. And on it goes. So the novel rounds out by this long extended stay, and Baalbek finally concludes, and everyone's kind of going home for the season, and then we kind of are left in a state of indeterminacy where we're not sure if the narrator is going to forsake his dreams of Albertine, if this is going to continue later on. Spoiler alert, it does continue eventually, but for the time being, this period in his life has concluded, and he's heading back to Paris. And that's sort of a quick synopsis. I left a lot out, obviously, but it gives you like a little bit of a flavor for it. Now, the major thing, my takeaway from this book, and one reason I like it so much, is that it's such a great portrait of young love and attraction and infatuation, let's call it. And like, I'm sort of picturing they're like teenagers, and it's so confusing. A lot of this resonates, with my own life experience of, crushing on girls and all that. And there's just a lot to connect to. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating, and it's also very, very. The writing is really lovely. There's like lots of great portraits of the characters, and in all their innocence, and in their corruption, and in their hypocrisy, and their unpredictability, their instability. So it's just, if you love Proust, you're going to love it. If you don't love Proust, you're not going to love it. What can I say? Let me talk a little bit about the translation. It's because I've had my eye on that. And here, I don't want to sound too hard, but I'll just give you my impressions. The James Grieve translation didn't get off to a good start in his introduction because it sounded like he was being quite pedantic, sort of pointing out all the errors in Proust's writing, like things that he forgot or got wrong and so forth. Well, that's okay, but I almost expect that in a novel of this length. You add up all these volumes, you're talking a lot of pages, thousands. And I just thought that was kind of like weird that he it's almost like, he was annoyed at Proust or something. Maybe he spent too much time translating and was a frustrating experience. But it just kind of got off on the wrong foot, and you find that in some of the end notes too, where he's just sort of pointing out things, correcting Proust and things like that. Well, okay, that's fine, but to me, there's better reasons to have end notes. And then as far as the translation itself, my overall impression was it was fine. I think Lydia Davis. This is a hot take, but I think Lydia Davis did a better job with Swan's Way than James Grieve did with this. And my memory of the C.K. Scott Moncrieff, which now it's been many years since I read it, I really adored this volume. It was maybe my favorite of all of them. This one, it didn't spring forth quite the same way. A lot of it is quite lucid. It's not a bad read at all. It's a good translation. Let me just make that point. It's a good translation, but it seems to have lost some flavor. It has lost some of the fragrance of the original translation, and it doesn't feel quite as lyrical, not quite as poetic. And I noticed this in certain passages where, again, it's uneven, so sometimes he does a great job, and it really hits hard and well, and so forth. But there's some of these long, drawn-out Proustian passages, super long sentences, and so forth. They can get quite opaque, and it's a real challenge for the translator. You have to have a deft touch. You have to know how to pitch those long sentences. This is something that I think C.K. Scott Moncrieff was especially good at. Like, you have to know like where the sentence is heading and how to stick the landing when it's all done. And sometimes I felt that James Grieve got a little too caught up in the weeds, in the brambles of these long, convoluted sentences, and you lose the thread a little bit, or you lose some of or in his effort to be, literal and kind of get it accurately down, you lose some of the poetry of the sentences. So that's where it seemed to falter a little bit for me. But that being said, a lot was clear. And I think, again, it's been a while since I read the other translation, and this refreshed my memory and brought things more to light, things that I'm seeing that I hadn't noticed the first time. But when I finished it, I thought I really was wanting to go back to the C.K. Scott Moncrieff and give that volume a read, just for the sake of comparison, because my strong hunch is that I prefer the C.K. Scott Moncrieff for this volume. And yeah, so every volume in this newer series is different translators. That makes it fun to follow. So that's James Grieve's translation. And let me now find a passage to read with you, and we'll compare the newer translation to the older translation, and maybe you can see some of what I talked about. I might read a couple passages here for comparison. This is one of the more spicy passages in The Shadow of Young Girls in Flower, and it involves the narrator and Gilbert with some horseplay that becomes a bit sexual. And, this is sort of, it's kind of a funny little scene. So let me cut in here. This is starting on page 66 of the James Grieve translation. I think you'll pick up on what's going on pretty quickly. Having taken leave of the Countess, I soon left Françoise to her own devices and went back to Gilberte. I saw her sitting on a chair behind the clump of laurels, so as to be invisible to her friends, with whom she was playing hide and seek. I sat beside her. She was wearing a flat toque, which almost covered her eyes and gave them the sly, unfocused, evasive expression I remembered from the first time I had seen it at Cambrai. I asked her whether there might not be a way for me to talk this thing over with her father. Gilberte said she had already suggested this and that he could see no point in it. Anyway, look, she said, here's your letter back. We'd better go back to the others now, since nobody's found me. If Monsieur Swann had come upon us before I had managed to retrieve the letter, whose sincerity he had been unreasonable enough to doubt, he might well have concluded that his doubt was fully justified. As I came close to Gilberte, who was leaning back in her chair, telling me to take the letter, but not handing it to me, I felt so attracted by her body that I said, "You try to stop me from getting it, and we'll see who wins." She held it behind her back, and I put my hands behind her neck, lifting the long plaits which hung on her shoulders, either because it was a hairstyle that suited her age, or because her mother wanted her to appear younger than she was, so as not to age too rapidly herself. And in that strained posture, we tussled with each other. I kept trying to draw her closer to me. She kept resisting. Flushed with the effort, her cheeks were as red and round as cherries. She laughed as though I were tickling her. I had her pinned between my legs as though she were the bole of a little tree I was trying to climb. In the middle of all my exertions, without my breathing being quickened much more than it already was by muscular exercise and the heat of the playful moment, like a few drops of sweat produced by the effort, I shed my pleasure before I even had time to be aware of the nature of it, and managed to snatch the letter away from her. Gilberte said in a friendly tone, "If you like, we could wrestle a bit more." The first time I read that, the line, "I shed my pleasure," I glossed over it, and now I realize what was going on. So let's compare this to the C.K. Scott Moncrieff. Okay, I found it in the C.K. Scott Moncrieff. We'll pick up at the same point of entry and compare the translations and see which one you like better. A moment later, I said goodbye to the Marquise and went out accompanied by Françoise, whom I left to return to Gilberte. I caught sight of her at once on a chair behind the clump of laurels. She was there so as not to be seen by her friends. They were playing at hide and seek. I went and sat down by her side. She had on a flat cap which drooped forwards over her eyes, giving her the same underhand, brooding, crafty look which I had remarked in her that first time at Cambrai. I asked her if there was not some way for me to have it out with her father, face to face. Gilberte said that she had suggested that to him, but that he had not thought it of any use. "Look," she went on, "don't go away without your letter. I must run along to the others as they haven't caught me." Had Swann appeared on the scene then, before I had recovered it, this letter, by the sincerity of which I felt that he had been so unreasonable in not letting himself be convinced, perhaps he would have seen that it was he who had been in the right. For as I approached Gilberte, who, leaning back in her chair, told me to take the letter, but did not hold it out to me, I felt myself so irresistibly attracted by her body that I said to her, "Look, you try to stop me from getting it, we'll see which is the stronger." She thrust it behind her back. I put my arms round her neck, raising the plaits of hair which she wore over her shoulders, either because she was still of an age for that, or because her mother chose to make her look a child for a little longer, so that she herself might still seem young. And we wrestled, locked together. I tried to pull her towards me. She resisted. Her cheeks, inflamed by the effort, were as red and round as two cherries. She laughed as though I were tickling her. I held her gripped between my legs like a young tree which I was trying to climb. And in the middle of my gymnastics, when I was already out of breath with the muscular exercise and the heat of the game, I felt, as it were, a few drops of sweat wrung from me by the effort. My pleasure express itself in a form which I could not even pause for a moment to analyze. Immediately, I snatched the letter from her, whereupon Gilberte said good-naturedly, If you like, we might go on wrestling for a little. So we have subtle differences there. I think the little shedding my pleasure part was even more subtle in this one. But just comparing these quickly, I feel like I like some of the word choices, the vocabulary better in the C.K. Scott Moncrieff. They're close, but the way it's pitched, the tone, it's a little nicer. I'm going to try to find another passage to compare, one more, and I'll be really curious to see what people think of these two different translations. Okay, let me read you a passage from the C.K. Scott Moncrieff translation about, now that the narrator has seen the girls on the beach and he's become smitten with them, he's sort of reacting and strategizing and so forth. I think this will speak for itself. I'll start in here and then we'll compare back to James Grieve this time. So here's C.K. Scott Moncrieff from the original translation, Remembrance of Things Past, Within a Budding Grove. I seized every pretext for going down to the beach at the hours when I hoped to succeed in finding them there. Having caught sight of them once while we were at luncheon, I now invariably came in late for it, waiting interminably upon the front for them to pass, devoting all the short time that I did spend in the dining room to interrogating with my eyes its azure wall of glass, rising long before the dessert, so as not to miss them should they have gone out at a different hour, and chafing with irritation at my grandmother when with unwitting malevolence she made me stay with her past the hour that seemed to me propitious. I tried to prolong the horizon by setting my chair aslant. If by chance I did catch sight of no matter which of the girls, since they all partook of the same special essence, it was as if I had seen projected before my face in a shifting diabolical hallucination a little of the unfriendly and yet passionately coveted dream which but a moment ago had existed only where it lay stagnant for all time in my brain. I was in love with none of them, loving them all. And yet the possibility of meeting them was in my daily life the sole element of delight, alone made to burgeon in me those high hopes by which every obstacle is surmounted, hopes ending often in fury if I had not seen them. For the moment, these girls eclipsed my grandmother in my affection. The longest journey would at once have seemed attractive to me, had it been to a place in which they might be found. It was to them that my thoughts comfortably clung when I supposed myself to be thinking of something else or of nothing. But when, even without knowing it, I thought of them, they, more unconsciously still, were for me the mountainous blue undulations of the sea, a troop seen passing in outline against the waves. Our most intensive love for a person is always the love really of something else as well. Okay, that's C.K. Scott Moncrieff. Let's compare the same passage in the James Grieve translation. Of all possible pretexts, I went down to the beach at any hour when I hoped they might be expected. Having seen them once while we were having lunch, I became very unpunctual at that mealtime, waiting about on the esplanade in case they came along. For the short time I sat in the dining room, my stare questioned the blue of the glass doors. I went without dessert so as not to miss them if they had been out for their walk at some different hour, and I was annoyed at my grandmother's unintentional unkindness when she made me sit there with her after the time I thought the most propitious. I tried to lengthen the horizon by setting my chair at an angle to the table, and if by some chance I caught sight of any one of the girls, it suddenly felt, since all of them had a share in the same special essence, as though a fickle and diabolical hallucination had projected before my eyes a scene from the latent dream, baleful yet ardently desired, that a moment before had existed only in my mind, where it always lay in readiness. Loving them all, I was in love with none of them, and yet the possibility of meeting them was the only element of delight in my days, the only source of those hopes which make one feel capable of overcoming all obstacles, and which for me, if I did not see them, were often dashed and turned to rage. The girls eclipsed my grandmother. I would gladly have left for a long journey if it had promised to lead me to where they were. They were what was always hovering agreeably in my thoughts, whenever I thought I was thinking of something else or of nothing, and even when I was unaware of thinking about them. At a deeper level of unconsciousness, they were the towering blue waves, or the shapes of a parade passing in front of the sea. If I went to another town where I might meet them, it was the sea I looked forward to seeing. The most exclusive love for any person is always love for something else. What do you think, comparing the two? This one seemed a little bit more direct, a little simpler than the C.K. Scott Moncrieff. And yet I do feel like sometimes there's just these little stumbles or missteps, whereas the cohesion of the C.K. Scott Moncrieff, it feels more cohesive to me. It feels a little more whole. Like he's able to capture the whole paragraph, like the essence of the paragraph, where that paragraph's headed, where it's going to land, and then he's able to kind of stitch the details together, the threads. It's very subtle, but that's what I see and what I feel like. So yeah, I'd just be curious as to what other people think of it. Am I making mountains out of molehills? It's not a deal breaker for me at all. I really do think this is a fine translation, and I really enjoyed reading it. It was great. I've already begun the Guermantes Way, the next volume. I'm over 100 pages into that. That is perhaps the longest volume in the whole set of In Search of Lost Time, and different translator this time, but that one's going really well. So anyway, I'm going to cut it short here. That's my Proust update. Let me know what you think. What do you think just in general of this book, no matter which translation you've read? I adore it. I just love it. He's girl crazy all throughout the book, and it seems like he keeps sort of exchanging different objects of his attraction as we move through. And that's going to continue into the next volume too, where the Duchess de Guermantes becomes the focus of his attentions. Anyway, let me know what you think. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I hope you like and subscribe, and I hope to be back real soon with another video. Bye-bye.